Hello and welcome to RT Ministries. My name is Dwayne and this is the Bible study portion of RT Ministries. This week we're in chapter 14 of Acts. Chapter 14. Last chapter the Gentiles were starting to rejoice because the word was, Paul and Barnabas had conflict, but the gospel was spreading from what Jews thought were just for the Jews to the Gentiles also. They began rejoicing, and then they believed. Then, when Paul and Barnabas told the message to a group of people in a room, only those who were appointed for salvation believed, and that's how the Lord saves people. You can call it election, you can call it whatever, People don't like that, but God has chosen you before the foundation of the world, wrote your name in a book. He chose everybody he's going to save before the foundation of the world, before he even made the world. So it's something that's true. So, well, welcome back, and we'll hit 14 now, chapter 14. In Iconium, they entered a synagogue of the Jews together, and that was their normal pattern. Paul's pattern was to enter a new city and go into the synagogue and start preaching. And tying Jesus with the Old Testament. That's what he always did. Because he obviously didn't have the New Testament yet. And spoke in such a manner that a large number of people believed, both Jews and of Greeks. So Paul spoke with authority, and I think a lot of that's lost today. A lot of Christians I hear speaking anyway, outside and stuff, they just can't seem to defend themselves very well. And I don't know if that's from a lack of studying or a lack of confidence, but us as people, as saved people in the Lord, should be confident in the Lord. Confident in what you say. Boast. I mean, we should be so confident in what we have to say, we should just about shake the walls everywhere we go. The Lord is inside of you. He's there to help you. He's with you. Be confident. Have your trust in Him. Jesus said, without Jesus, you can do nothing. So you got to abide in Him, He'll abide in you. What does abide mean? Just means stay with Him. Don't leave Him. A lot of people come to church for a while, then leave Him. Don't leave Him. So it's a large number of Jews and Greeks believed. But, verse 2, the Jews who disbelieved stirred up the minds of the Gentiles and embittered them against the brethren. See, the people that do not believe, the people that reject the gospel, are the ones that hate Christ. Jesus said you can't, if you're not for me, you're against me, right? There's no middle ground. So the ones here who disbelieved, they actually stirred people up against Him. They hated the message so much that they stirred up people. And you'll find that happens today too. I've talked to a group of people before, I've talked to a couple of people before, but if they reject the gospel, they usually turn on you and they start mocking you, or they'll go to other people and mock you. And so don't be surprised if that happens. 3, therefore they spent a long time there speaking boldly with reliance upon the Lord. See, here's the key. He had opposition, therefore they spent as soon as he had opposition, he spent more time there. Sometimes our first thought is to turn tail and run as soon as we have opposition. Well, first off, we know as Christians the gospel brings persecution. The gospel, if you tell the gospel to people, it's going to bring trouble. But Paul's first saying he stayed there longer. Spent a long time there boldly with reliance upon the Lord. See, Paul just didn't stay there in his own power. He stayed there boldly, he's relying on the Lord, and he stayed there a long time. I like how this put it, boldly with reliance upon the Lord. If you have a lot of opposition, hang on to the Lord, because the Lord is the only one that can kill that opposition, right? Or dig through that opposition. It's a spiritual battle, right? The Bible says your battle is not against flesh and blood, it's against spirits, it's against demons. So Christians, your true battle is against demonic forces behind people. They use people as puppets. That is where your battle is. And you go out there and rely heavily upon the Lord in everything you do and say. Jesus said, without me you can do nothing. So they stayed there longer, boldly, with reliance upon the Lord, who is testifying to the word of His grace, granting that signs and wonders be done by their hands. Okay, the early church. God chose in the early church to do signs and wonders. And there's a lot of people that write in and call in or talk to me and say, why isn't God doing that now? Well, one reason is you don't have to prove we're Christians anymore. I mean, these people were raw. There was no scripture. There was no nothing. It's just the Old Testament who talked about the Messiah coming. And in order to prove that he was a Messiah, he did signs and wonders. In order to prove that we're followers of Christ and to prove Christ was still alive, he did signs and wonders until the New Testament came. You zap through time, God pulled the New Testament together for us. We have more in the New Testament than Paul had physically. You know more about Christ through the New Testament than you would know one standing right in front of him. Signs and wonders. There's enough evidence out there through the New Testament and through his people that we don't need signs and wonders, because soon signs and wonders are going to disappear. About halfway through Acts or so, it never talked about again. All the New Testament is about Paul and his writings, and about faith, about trust, about reliance upon the Lord. Now, does God do signs and wonders? I think he still does. If there's a point, if there's a time, maybe, in a situation where you're in the middle of a jungle and God chooses to do something for somebody to prove who you are, that's up to the Lord. But certainly it's not his normal. And certainly he doesn't do signs and wonders to parade it on top of a stage on TV in front of people. Jesus, just about every time Jesus did a miracle, he said, don't tell anybody. So, God doesn't parade, Jesus Christ don't parade his magic act. So, listen, we have enough in the New Testament, and we have enough evidence in nature to know that Christ is real. And people have no excuse, right? Romans 1 was written, people have no excuse. Even if they don't see signs and wonders, they have no excuse. They know Christ is real. 4, but the people of the city were divided, okay? Circle that divided, because this is exactly what Jesus came to do. He came to divide. Listen, Jesus said he came to divide. A mother against a daughter, daughter against a father against a son. Jesus divides, because if you have 3 family members and one comes to the Lord and 2 doesn't, it's going to divide. If 2 come to the Lord and 1 don't, it's going to divide. Jesus divides. Get used to that. It's almost a shock to people now. But some of the people were divided, and some sided with the Jews. Okay, some went with the Jews who disbelieved, and some with the apostles. Okay, it was divided. It's just dividing everybody, and it's supposed to. And when an attempt was made by both the Gentiles and the Jews with their rulers to mistreat and stone them, so somebody tried to mistreat them, probably beat them up and just stone them. Now, remember before I said some people quickly turn tail and run? Now, here's a situation where they were going to try to beat them and stone them. And they have found out about it. What's the best situation to do then? Before it was just the words. Now it's physical. They became aware of it and fled to the cities of Lycaonia, Lystra, and Derbe, and the surrounding region. And this is a time, and I believe God will tell you when to run and when to stay. But this is a time where you could run and preach another day, The crowd was getting, seems the context of this, the crowd was being divided and everybody was getting louder and more angry, and finally people were going to try to stone him. I think it's best that no longer, there's nothing more that could have been done there. So they turned and ran. But here's the key, and they continued to preach to God. So wherever they ended up in Lycaonia, Lystra, and Derbe in the surrounding region. But wherever they went, they kept preaching. So whatever happens to you, keep preaching. It doesn't stop them. I mean, they might have moved. The time for you sometime might be to stop talking and get out of there. But it's never a time to stop preaching the gospel wherever you go. Wherever you end up is where God wanted you. So keep preaching. 8. At Lystra, a man was sitting who had no strength in his feet, lame from his mother's womb, who had never walked. Okay, here's a man from birth who has never walked. Now, I want you to... Somebody who's never walked has 0 muscles in their leg, right? If you ever seen a lame person or a paralyzed person, if their arm is paralyzed, there's absolutely no muscle. It's just bones because it's never been used. You got to work the muscles to have them, work and to bulk them up. He had no muscle in his legs. 9. This man was listening to Paul as he spoke. Okay, Paul was speaking, and this lame man was listening, who, when he had fixed his gaze on him, had seen that he had faith to be made well. Okay, Paul looked at this lame man who was listening. When you tell the gospel to people, you can see I've told the gospel to one person, there's 2 others listening. Sometimes God works through listening. It wasn't even the one you're talking to. So Paul was talking, and he looked at this lame man, and he seen he had faith. God must have told Paul that he had faith to be saved. And 10, with a loud voice, stand up, upright on your feet. For a loud voice, first thing Paul said was to stand up. And when he leaped up, he began to walk. And I want to tell you, this is why I told you about the lame and the no muscles. When Jesus healed, he always heals 100% completely. If he had to heal this person's leg, Jesus Christ, the Creator, had to make muscle on his leg, form muscle around his legs. This guy didn't just get up and stretch and waddle around with energy, pulsing back in his legs. He got up with a brand new set of legs, and he jumped around and he walked around. There was no slowness about it. It was immediate. Jesus, all his healings are immediate. If somebody was blind from birth, he created new eyes, right? Somebody had a lame hand, he created new hands. Somebody was dead, he reformed all the cells back to living. He reformed the body and brought him back to life. This is the Creator. This is why the charlatans of today on TV who fix somebody's neck or back and they crawl or hunch out and stand up a little bit and walk, that's not healing. Jesus always healed 100% from 0 to 100%. 11, when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they raised their voice, saying in Lycaonian language, the gods have become like men and have come down to us. Okay. Now in this culture, they were heavily into Zeus and Greek gods, and they always thought that they would come down among us, and they always thought they lived among us. But now they seen Paul do this, so their first thing is to think that Paul is a god. And they began calling Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes because he was the chief speaker. So they thought they were both gods. Now people like to worship things. This is the mindset of people. But they thought they were both gods right away. And of course, if you're a true person of God, you will stop people from worshiping you. Like the Pope. If he was a true person of God, which he's not, because his doctrine's all wrong, and there's so many things wrong with the Roman Catholic Church, I need 4 hours to talk about it. But the Pope doesn't stop glory from going out to people. He takes the glory, lets people kiss his hands and feet, and that's somebody stealing glory from God. These people don't. Paul and Barnabas don't. 13, the priests of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought oxen and garlands at the gate and wanted to offer sacrifices with the crowd. So Zeus's priests brought animals to kill, to sacrifice towards Paul and Barnabas. Here's what happens when a true Christian hears it. But when the apostle Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their robe. This is the first thing they did, because they got the message wrong. They attributed to them godhood and wasn't hearing the true message about Jesus Christ. So the first thing they grieved, they tore their robe and rushed out onto the crowd, crying out, 15, and saying, men, why are you doing these things? We're also men of the same nature as you. Okay? So the first thing they did was dispel the God thing. They said, look, we're the same as you. We're men just like you are. Same nature as you, and preach the gospel to you that you should turn from these vain things to a living God. Okay? First thing, I'm not a god. We're just like you. Second thing, we preach to turn you from this kind of stuff that you're doing right now, these vain things, and turn you to the living God. They always pointed to Christ, and anybody who's true follower of Jesus Christ will always point to him. They tried to point him to the God, and then he's going to distinguish the God now, because If he says God in this context, they're going to think Zeus, they're going to think other Greek gods. He said he's the God who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. He's giving them he's pointing them to the Creator God. Then he goes a little bit more in detail. In the generations gone by, or in the past, he permitted all the nations to go their own way. Okay? In the past, God was tolerant. He was a little more tolerant. Let's see, how can I say this? God was tolerant in that before Christ came, God was more tolerant and more patient. I shouldn't say more tolerant, because God's standards are always the same, but before Christ, God was more patient with people. He seemed like he didn't go to people and demand as much. Now, though, when Christ has died, now you're going to find out after Christ died what God really demands. And yet, to permitted all nations to go their own way. He didn't stop nations from doing what they wanted to do. They went their own way, but now, and yet he did not leave himself without witness. Okay, even during that time, the people way back when they went their own way didn't. Look, they're dead now, but they're in front of God. They have no excuses. Nobody has any excuses. He did not leave himself without witness, in that he did good and gave you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your heart with food and gladness. Okay, he's telling these Greeks, look at God let you go the way you wanted, but now since Christ died, something else big has changed. 18. Even saying these things with difficulty, they restrained the crowds from offering sacrifice to them. Even saying all this, the crowd still wanted to sacrifice them. I think we have to stop here. To you out there who isn't saved, if anybody's listening who's not saved, he didn't leave himself without excuse. He gives you food, he gives you rain, you have water, you have a home, you have a family. He gives all this out of his grace, common grace to you. But now that Jesus Christ has died and we live on the other side of the cross, he demands that everyone, everywhere, listen, everyone over all continents of the earth to repent and turn to his Son for forgiveness of sins. He demands everyone, everywhere, on every continent to do this. And we'll read more about that the next time. We're going to read about God let the nations go their own way, was patient with them, but now that Christ died, what he demands now. Listen, no matter where you are on this earth, you have no excuse not to come to the Lord. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye.